Well, there we are. We're ready to go. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for the 2025 Power Hour series. And specifically for episode 1, we're going to be talking about rethinking renewables and regional development. Across Australia, the energy transition is reshaping regional communities, both bringing enormous opportunity and real challenges. These communities aren't only hosting the majority of the infrastructure, they're also navigating deep social, economic, and environmental change. As momentum builds, so does the need for us to engage more effectively and respectfully and to genuinely partner with the communities and the people who are at the heart of this transition. We know that this work is complex, and while there's already some great practice happening out there, communities consistently still tell me that they feel like the transition is happening to them rather than with them. And the impacts, opportunities, and community sentiment are around each project are really unique, just like each community and region is totally different. But collectively, we really need to work to raise the bar, to improve community outcomes, and also the sector's overall social licence. And that is what this series is about. We're here to bring you fresh perspectives, bold ideas, and voices that you actually won't hear anywhere else. We're going to bring a real slice of regional Australia straight to you. And it will be especially good if the internet works for our mayor in Dalby, because one of the joys of working with people from regional areas is the internet. Anywho, so with this series, we want to support you. We want to challenge your thinking this year, and we invite you to see regional engagement differently. By the end of the hour, we really hope that you walk away with some fresh insights, some deeper understanding, and hopefully also some practical strategies for your toolkit. Today, as I said, we're diving into renewable energy and how it can unlock regional development opportunities. And we're going to be drawing on the insights and real world experience of our guest speakers from a regional, national, and international context. So let's get started. I'm Wendy Agar from Engaged Outcomes, and I'm delighted to be bringing you this Power Hour. It is going to be 60 minutes of insights and inspirations from our absolutely brilliant guest speakers. We have Amanda Cahill doing our keynote. She's the founder of Next Economy, and that will be followed by, hopefully, if the internet gods work, Andrew Smith, the Mayor of Western Downs, and Joanna Stevens is our regional engagement expert. She's the founder from Premier Strategy. Before I go any further, though, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm joining you today from the land of the Turrbal and Yagara people. I acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands wherever you're joining us from today and pay my respects to their elders past and present. I also extend that respect to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait people joining us on the call today. I'd also like to give a really huge shout out to our 2025 series partners, PowerLink and WindLab. I really need to thank them for sharing our vision of giving forward with this series to provide free access to real voices from the regions, best practice thinking, and world-class experts. At Engaged Outcomes, we're on a mission to improve the way engagement is done in regional Australia. And this Power Hour series, alongside our Empower podcast series, are two ways that we're working towards that goal. Now, a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. I do need to let you know that we are recording this session. It's lovely to see you all on mute. And I do love that you keep your cameras on too, if we can see you, because it feels a little bit like we're in a room then. And this is meant to be a participative session. We really want it to be your learning experience, and I know that the guests are really looking forward to interacting with you and answering your questions later on. So if you're not used to using Zoom, I will give you a quick guide. It's a little bit different to Teams. All the little actions are down the bottom, and we might start today by getting you to find the chat box. It would be really awesome if you could find the chat box and maybe just show us you're here by putting in an emoji to show how you're feeling today, and also maybe pop in there where you're calling in from. Hello, Patrick. You are quick off the mark. Good morning to you, Patrick Q. So the chat's down the bottom and the emojis are there too. Hello, Tony Ward. We're looking forward to hearing from Tony later. She's going to do the sponsors wrap up for WindLab. Hey, Laura. Jared's bright in Brisbane and Rachel's dialing in from Toowoomba. Yay, someone from Hobart. Wonderful to have you here, James. And I bet it's cold. Morning from Geelong, wet and rainy in Wollongong. I'm so excited. Someone from Ariba. I'm so excited. Hello, Canberra. Hello, Geelong. Hello, Ballarat. So excited that this year we've taken a more national focus, because what we learnt last year, even though we focused on Queensland, the issues are national. And we had people listening from all over the country. So we thought this year we would step it up and look at that broader national focus rather than just Queensland. So fantastic to have you all on here, and thank you for committing the time out of your really busy day. So let's get started. Our format is slightly different to last year. You'll hear from our keynote, and then the keynote's going to join two other guests for the panel session, and we've allowed more time for questions this year. So, and to make it simple, if you could pop your questions in the chat box with who you want them to be for, and we will come back to them when it's question time. So let's get started. I'm so excited to welcome Amanda Cahill as the keynote for this session today. Amanda is the founder and, as of about 1 week ago, the former CEO of The Next Economy. And we're super lucky to have her here because she's actually on leave and she is hot off the trail of her book tour. So if you don't, if you don't know, she is the author of this fabulous book, which is not going to show. Oh, there we go. And I highly recommend it. It's called Regional Energy Transitions in Australia from Impossible to Possible. And Amanda is one of the co-editors of that and also a co-author. And it's a fantastic resource that I recommend to you all. So a little bit more about Amanda, and you'll know why she's our keynote today. She founded The Next Economy, and what they do is they support regional communities across Australia to manage the transition to net zero in a way that builds more equitable and regenerative communities. She has over 30 years' experience working with change makers across the world to address economic and health inequalities, environmental degradation, women's rights, and climate justice. She's a Churchill Fellow and has a PhD from ANU. She's also a research fellow at the University of Melbourne and an industry fellow at the University of Sydney. This makes her the absolutely perfect person for our keynote today on rethinking renewables and regional development. So welcome, Amanda. Over to you.
Thanks, Wendy. I always feel like when you do introductions, you put so much pressure on me.
More of these amazing speakers, so over to you.
Yeah, well, I actually recognise a lot of the names and faces on the call. So there's actually a huge amount of expertise and people who are on the ground doing this work on the call. So I'm looking forward to the conversation moving ahead. And thank you, Wendy, for hosting this and also the podcast. And really, it's really important gap that you're filling in. Actually, there's so much going on to actually lift up the lessons in real time. So thank you for your work in this space as well. I'd also like to acknowledge that I'm also calling in from the lands of the Yagara and Turrbal peoples here in Brisbane, and acknowledge any First Nations people on this call and pay my respects to elders past and present. And in this space, I'd also like to acknowledge the amazing work of Aboriginal Power and the First Nations Clean Energy Network, which is doing some excellent work with companies and communities all around Australia, making sure that First Nations rights are represented, but also that we're seeing much more equitable outcomes in this space. As Wendy mentioned, so I'm from The Next Economy, and for the last 15 years, I've been working with regional communities all around Australia, really understanding how is the energy system changing and how do we manage the impacts of that. A lot of the work I've done over that time is actually more in the coal space around closure, but in the last 5 years or so, we've moved also not just managing what's sort of leaving the energy system, but also what's coming in terms of renewable energy. We've also expanded our work beyond energy, because working with a regional economic development approach means you actually, we have to work holistically with communities and meet them where they're at. So we're getting a lot of requests now in other sectors that are also managing the decarbonisation processes, like the land sector, forestry communities, and also the impacts on other sectors, and that intersection also with climate impacts. So, for example, work we've been doing in Hay, they came to us and said, look, we've got a whole lot of new energy coming in, but agriculture is changing as well. How do we manage that to actually make sure we've got a strong economy into the future at the same time as we're dealing with more and more climate impacts? So we meet communities where they're at to kind of go, what are the range of issues that they're dealing with, and how do they actually identify some options to move forward in a way that brings everyone along on that journey. So our guiding question is, what does good economic development look like? But coming back to the topic here, and as people on the call are going to be very well aware, because you're out in communities and on the front line hearing about it, we are at a really, really critical stage in the energy transition. We're in the implementation phase. For a long time, there was kind of debate and a lot of talk about, what might happen into the future. The future is here. We're getting projects built all around the country, and we're still trying to figure out exactly what that's going to look like. So we're building the ship as we're sailing it. The scale and pace of this change is enormous, so it's actually completely understandable that there are going to be challenges and that we're going to see community pushback against that. And I think talking to communities, yes, there are challenges specifically with renewable energy, but there's also another conversation that's happening in the rooms that we're in, which is people really standing up and saying they want development in general to be done differently in rural and regional communities, because the communities have been on the receiving end of development for decades that hasn't always benefited them or left them better off in the end. They haven't seen those tangible benefits, and they've seen a lot of wealth extracted from their communities for the benefit of people, not just in other parts of Australia, but also companies around the world. So communities are saying, how can we approach this particular development challenge in a different way? We don't just see those boom and bust cycles that have quite negative impacts over the long term. Communities are asking for a more holistic approach, although they want the cumulative impacts to be measured and to be engaged in a way that they can actually shape some of that development. They want to make sure that we don't see further environmental harm. They want to see that they want to feel like when they're being engaged that it's genuine, that they're not just being marketed to or being sold a message. And they want a lot more transparency, because it is confusing. Even somebody who works in the sector, things are moving so fast. It's really hard to get a gauge on what's really going on, what the latest frameworks are, and also how we can address any challenges that do come up in a timely and fair way. And we're trying to do all of this in, unfortunately, what is still a politically fraught environment. I think it's going to continue to be politically challenging, even post the election, the federal election that we've just had. And we're doing this all in a context where we're also getting external pressure from international financiers and companies who are really frustrated with, what they're perceiving as quite long approval times and projects being held up. Australia's not alone with these challenges. I was actually on a call last week. There was 2 nights of gathering of people who are working on just transitions work around the country. So that's partly renewable energy development, but it's also managing coal closures in many parts of the world, but also the development of critical minerals, so different aspects of the energy transition. And what was interesting is, right here, there seems to be so many challenges, but actually compared to the rest of the world, we're actually quite far ahead. We actually have a lot of really good tools and frameworks and regulation and legislation that helps us manage this well. So we're actually ahead of a lot of parts of the world. It's not to say it's not difficult, but we do have things to work with that other countries don't have. Just to give you an example, there was a woman from central part of South America who was talking about, she was talking about critical minerals and lithium mining, and her communities were just trying to get the government to inform them about projects coming into their region. So she was saying engagement would be great, but we just want to know what's actually happening to our communities. And they were seeing some really nasty impacts of companies not being held to account, and water pollution of all their drinking water supplies. So, we've got that extreme, but so we've got. I sort of want to challenge people to think about what do we have that we can work with, and how do we improve on that and build on it and protect the things that have protected communities in the past and will continue into the future. So what is the work that we need to do? I think that the biggest thing that we're seeing at the moment, and of course this is different in different states, which makes it really complicated, but there are some basic principles and some basic trends across different places that we're working with that we keep seeing. And the first one that was, which is really clear, is that a question around how we resource communities to be able to better understand and analyse what energy changes mean for them, and how we can actually support them to do some of that analysis and planning and engagement on their own terms in advance of having to negotiate with companies and government. So where are their funds available, particularly for local councils, so they can actually bring in the expertise that they need to do an assessment of cumulative impacts and identify their own priorities in terms of investment? A lot of councils are saying, that sometimes the first times they're hearing about things is where proponents are coming in to negotiate community benefits with them, and they haven't done the work to actually even know what they need to ask for or what their rights are in that process. So they're on the back foot. And some councils, particularly in some of the smaller rural ones, don't have even an economic development officer or a planning officer. So they're lacking that capacity. So where do the resources come from to enable councils to get to a place where they can actually engage with that? And that they can assess their go zones and their no-go zones, whether that's environmental, social, or culturally. Also, how do they access information to enable that greater transparency to know what they can do? And I think there's been some really great initiatives like the Queensland Farmers Federation Landholders Toolkit that was developed a couple of years ago, and I think there's plans to update that so that landholders even know what their basic rights are. I think one of the things, though, that's also is being a bit lost at the moment is that this isn't just a one-off engagement process. It's how do we set up the resources and the capacity to enable an ongoing process to be able to deal with impacts as they come along, because this isn't just one point in time. This is going to be rolling out over quite a long period, particularly in areas where there's multiple projects going in. Some examples that are actually helping councils to navigate this, the New South Wales access fees has been quite important to particularly rural councils to provide financial resources so they can actually access expertise, whether it's legal or planning, so they can actually work things out. The res readiness frameworks, in some areas I've been hearing good things about, helping councils understand what's coming down the line so they can actually start to do their own assessments. And the work that we've been doing in Hay Shire, where they came up with their own renewable energy framework with the support of Realliance and ourselves, to actually really understand it from a more holistic way. So they've got a foundation now to actually launch a whole range of projects that are actually going to support them to navigate this change. They're doing a housing study, for example, around how they can use the opportunity of workers coming to the region to make sure some of the housing that gets developed, accommodation that gets development, is actually fit for purpose long-term for families to address some of the housing needs in the region. Not all of them. Some of the housing needs to be temporary, but where is it that they do want to set this up for the future, and how do they integrate that with their own planning frameworks around sewerage and land development and things like that? Other places they've received money to actually upgrade water treatment facilities as well. So it's looking at broader benefits there. The second thing that I think is quite urgent, and I think is going to be a priority moving forward, both at a federal level and at different state levels, is how do we address environmental concerns in an appropriate way? There's a lot of, there have been plans around doing, say, bioregional assessments, and that's a good way to go. Some of these things have been held up, and communities are saying that they want that in place so they can actually assess what the environmental impacts are going to be across the life cycle of those projects. And I know New South Wales and Queensland are talking about circular economy principles and actually integrating that into the approvals process. So there's end-of-life planning, for example, or development of recycling facilities and where those can go that actually makes sense. And I think the Smart Energy Council is doing some work on that at the moment. Also, the impacts on agriculture and how we can integrate things like agrivoltaics and regenerative work to address environmental impacts. The next area where there's a lot of work being done at the moment, but still kind of ideas phase, but we need to get into it, is around workforce planning. And there's kind of a contradiction in this in terms of, on one hand, the scale of the projects that are being developed is where are we going to have enough workers to be able to do this? Are there ways to actually do some pipeline planning, places where we've got public ownership of energy, such as Queensland, that could be more of an option than some other places. But the number of construction workers that are needed is massive, but it is time-bound. So on one hand, there's a huge need for workers. On the other hand, those jobs are not going to be there for a long term. So how do we manage the impacts of that, particularly on small communities? In larger places like industrial regions like the Hunter and central Queensland, how do we think through what the new industries are that could use the renewable energy that are going to create those longer term jobs, particularly jobs for workers that are going to be displaced from coal, either mining or generation over the long term? So how do we invest in the new industries in the future? So that takes a lot of planning. This is not going to happen on its own, and it can't be left to companies. It needs government intervention in that. In some places, there's been some really interesting initiatives around making sure that as we do address workforce issues, that we're more inclusive around that and engaging people who have not been engaged in the workforce necessarily traditionally. So looking at how do we make sure that any new jobs also benefit First Nations people, women, communities that speak a language other than English, long-term unemployed people. What are the support systems that are needed? And we did some research on this last year on an inclusive energy workforce report. And we actually had to shift our thinking around that from what is it that companies need to do to engage those people to what resourcing do we need for the services that can actually do the work to prepare workers, but also support companies. So employment services that deal with different groups. But also, how do we make sure we have things like childcare services and aged care services that enable women to be more engaged in the workforce? So there's other things around the renewable energy developments that are actually good for communities that we need to be investing in as well. And also thinking holistically about workforce shortages there are. Like one of the issues I think people on the call will be familiar with is actually having enough community engagement professionals and planning professionals to be able to do the work. So it's one thing to resource this work. It's another thing to have the people who know how to do that, and how do we train them up? There's a lot of community engagement people, but are they familiar with energy? And there's some really interesting projects going on about that. And I know Community Power Agency is working with the universities around accreditation in that space. I've already talked a little bit about this, but I think there's also a challenge that as we sort of rush to make sure that we're setting up community benefits, so particularly companies that are wanting to do the right thing and make sure that there's benefits, that we take the time to think about that from a more holistic angle. So this isn't, a number of communities that have expressed some frustration with every individual company coming in and setting up their own community fund. So, that's kind of bare minimum. But what's the point of having 7 funds that only have small amounts of money in them? Can we pool those funds? And I know there's some plans to do that around Callide, for example. But even if we're pooling it, how do we make sure that we've got the governance structures set up at a local level, that the right people with the right input from the community are making those decisions about how to use those funds strategically and where do those funds sit? And we're doing some work in Uralla at the moment in the New England area around what that is. Do council hold on to it? Is it elected committee members? We have examples we can draw on, but there's also a lot more we could do to be a bit more creative around making sure that community have input into those funds, sort of learning from participatory budgeting techniques that have happened in many parts of the world. Another way of approaching that is also thinking about equity. And there's a few examples around Australia of where First Nations traditional owners have negotiated shared equity with companies in terms of shares of profits or ownership models. There's also risks around that also need to be addressed. So, but it's another way of thinking about it. Another way of thinking about it is community ownership and addressing energy poverty in some places as well. And I know Community Power Agency have done quite a lot of work supporting community-owned renewable energy systems and also people doing work around microgrids. So if you've got big transmission lines going through your community, how do you make sure some of that energy is actually coming into your place, which is the irony in a lot of places. Out of the Dyer report, I think there was some really interesting recommendations about the next thing that we're hearing about, which is just around basically transparency and also management of complaints and problems and resourcing that. Like the Australian Energy Infrastructure Commissioner office is tiny. Like we actually need to make sure that at a state and a federal level, there are the appropriate processes to deal with issues as they come up and to be dealt with in a timely way. And that we've got greater consistency across different states, which is easy to say, it's very difficult to do. But I know from a company perspective, we're hearing a lot of frustration that there's completely different models in different places. And that in some places like Queensland at the moment, things that were moving are now actually under review and paused, which actually really undermines investor confidence and certainty in these projects, but also communities as well are quite frustrated. So just to wrap up, there's a lot of challenges, but there's lots of examples all around Australia and the world that we can draw on. We have the building blocks in place and there is real willingness. There's a lot of frustration, but there's willingness across councils, communities, companies, state and federal government, like people who are trying to figure this out and find a way through. And we really have to. As I said, there's, the recent talk about reviewing targets and pausing projects, particularly in Queensland, is in itself doing damage. I think they've identified some issues that do need to be addressed, but there is a real time pressure at play here, whether we like it or not. Power plants, in terms of coal-fired power stations, are closing around the country over the next 5 to 10 years in particular. They are old. They're not going to be replaced wholesale with gas or nuclear, that they're not viable options. So we need to find ways to build the renewable energy that we need and the storage capacity, including looking at batteries, the new battery technology that's coming on that leave communities better off, but also reduce or avoid environmental harm into the future. And I'll leave it there.
Thank you so much, Amanda, for sharing that really broad-ranging basis for the rest of our conversation today. And sharing your insights across national and international research. We might power on, and I like a good pun, so please note, we're powering on, and we're going to hear from our expert panel, and I have my fingers crossed that the internet gods are on our side right now. Now, I know they are really keen for your questions, so please put your questions in the chat box as we go. Firstly, thank you so much for joining Amanda on the virtual stage today, Andrew and Joe. I think that you'll both pop up. There's Joe, and hopefully Andrew is joining us as well. Yay! There you are, Andrew, and I hope you're not frozen. I'd like to introduce Councillor Andrew Smith, who's the Mayor of the Western Downs Regional Council. We had some connectivity issues with Andrew on the day of the live recording, so we're catching up with him today so that we don't miss out on his valuable insights and his amazing experiences in this space. So for those of you who don't know him, Andrew's a farmer and a part-time publican, and he's the number one supporter of his local rugby club at Condamine near Dalby. He's in his 5th term on the council, having first been elected in 2008. Anyone who knows the region would know that over this time he's navigated the coal seam gas boom and is now the transition to renewables in his role as councillor, landholder and community member. So he's really bringing a wide range of perspectives and real-world experience to the table today. On council, he's always been really passionate about growing strong, diverse regional communities and has been a vocal advocate for long-term investment in water, roads and connectivity across the region, which is pretty ironic when we couldn't see or hear you the other day. Now, I am always pointing people to the Western Downs as a lighthouse example of a mature region that everyone could learn from. So I'm absolutely delighted that we're having a second go at this, Mayor, and I'd like to welcome you to our virtual forum today, Andrew.
Wendy, thank you very much. It's wonderful to be here, and I really do enjoy talking about our region and how we've developed. I think it's going to be a good conversation. We've got a wonderful region that is seeing so much opportunity at the moment, and has done for probably 15 years now with the diversification, as you mentioned, of our economy. So happy to be here.
So that's a great segue. Your region has already transitioned from primarily an agricultural base to an energy powerhouse. You've had over a decade of large-scale energy development through coal seam gas. What have you learned? What impact has this had on your communities?
Wendy, there's been some real change in our communities, and look, I think the further west you go, the more difficult change is. I was born and bred in the West. You know the West, and we're used to our communities being the way that they've always been, but we've seen some real change, and we quite often say, and it's part of our corporate plan, we're at the forefront of a changing world. And I guess with that statement comes opportunity, and that's what we've seen since the inception, I suppose, of the coal seam gas industry. We must remember, and we never forget that we are an ag-based region. Ag has been in our region since the mid-19th century. It is the backbone of the Western Downs, but we've been so lucky that we've had a diversification through the energy industry of our region, and that creates opportunity. A lot of opportunity, but it creates challenges as well. But as a regional council, we look for the opportunity. We look for how we can take advantage of that. Sometimes it does get a little confusing that because as a council we don't play a role in the assessment process of coal seam gas, of renewables. We certainly did early days with solar, but the state is taking over the approval process of solar farms. So we don't play a role from that perspective, and really conscious about not getting involved in the politics around what's good and what's bad from whether it be a green energy perspective or the challenge towards net zero. What we talk about in our region is about opportunity and what that can do for our region. And I think we've been fortunate since amalgamation, since the inception pretty much of the coal seam gas industry. We've had progressive councils that have really taken that opportunity.
You're talking about lots of opportunity. What do you see specifically as the regional development opportunities and challenges too around renewable projects as they roll out across your region, Andrew?
It's about diversifying our economy, and that's two words that are really, really important, and there are a lot of tentacles that come off a diversifying economy. What it's done is it creates opportunity for business. It creates opportunity for our landholders, and we mustn't forget, when it comes to renewable energy, the landholders in regional areas, they're the ones that are really being affected. But it does create opportunity, and we don't talk about it much, but the compensation agreements that come back into communities is really important. For a farmer, who's involved in some of these projects. The days of looking at the sky for the next drop of rain can be less of a challenge. And it's been but I don't want to take away the fact that there aren't challenges. We're seeing a lot of change. But one of the things I like to refer back to, Wendy, is, if we go back 20 years ago, 25 years ago, one of the greatest challenges that we had as regional communities that were in decline, can I remind everybody that they were in decline, was keeping our children in our regions. And it was only last week, and the timing was perfect, knowing that we were going to do this. I spoke to a young gentleman, when I say young, 30, 35, and he was with an energy company now. He's an advanced electrical skilled person, living between two rural communities just west of Miles. And he's able to now live in his community, practice the trade that he went to university to learn. Where if that case alone, and I asked him, I said, what if we didn't have energy in our region? His comments were, I'd have to be in probably Toowoomba or Brisbane. So it's that sort of thing that we're seeing come back into our region, which I think is for me personally, is one of the highlights. So we have opportunities now to keep our children that were going to university. We have opportunity to bring them home. We were actually exporting our clever kids. They were going to university and then moving on. But now, if you're a geologist, a hydrologist, an electrician, you name it, those opportunities are now in our region. And that alone is I think, is a really good story. A mayor 20 years ago was dealing with decline. And I've spoken to a few former mayors of our different shires in our region, and they'll all say the same. That was their concern. We now talk about growth and opportunity. But let's not forget, there are challenges around change, and we will support our community in that change. That's part of the challenge that we have as a local government. However, not to take our eye off the ball, be visionary and see what is supporting and creating a really diverse economy that gives us a future.
So you've touched on so many things there. I'd like to extend on the visionary point. I know that you've developed the community's partnering framework. Can you just touch on that? Because it certainly supports you to harness the regional development opportunity that's in front of you.
So that framework is, and in simple terms, it is about, I guess, so what we like to do as a council, I'll go back a couple of steps. We like to engage early. We like to build relationships, and communication is critical. We build those relationships because we want to look for opportunity. What our community partnering framework spells out to companies, big companies coming into our region, this is what we expect from you. We expect you to be good neighbours, work with our community. And once again, there's a whole number of ways to do that. But also it's about, you do the right thing, and this is how we can support you. This is what we will do to make your presence and full-time presence in our region much easier. So it is about a partnership, and that framework, while I could go into a little bit more detail, is really important. But in simple terms, it's about what we expect for companies coming into our region.
And it sits so nicely alongside the fact that so many of your towns across your council area have done their own strategic plans.
Absolutely. And that's been a real winner. It started out in the town of Miles. They put together a community plan, and they were early days, but they were really clear about what they wanted as a community. And so we're encouraging now all of our communities, and most of them have done it. We've got a couple now that are currently in the process of getting organised to get community plans, but it's really good. And what council have done purposely is stayed away from that process, because we don't want it to be driven by council. We want community to own the plans. We want it's got to be theirs. And like a lot of the companies that will look at those community plans, we do as a council as well. So come budget time, we look at community plans. We look at how we can support them. But what's really clear is the consultation has been done. It's been done in the community, by the community, and it just gives guidance to everyone as to what's important to that community, because all communities are different, and we don't want to change that. Sometimes as councils we tend to think everyone's the same, but they're not, and we have to acknowledge that, and the community plans are a good way of communities putting that out there.
And I love it too when there's so much talk about community benefit agreements at the moment. If you're working with your communities across your council area, actually that consultation and engagement's already been done. There's already a plan to have a look at what it is that they want or need. Now, we do need to wrap this up a bit with some wisdom of yours as a result of everything we've just talked about. And I know there's so much more. You and I have talked for many hours about all of this, but what, if you could wave your magic fairy wand, what are 3 things that you'd like to see engagement practitioners and developers more broadly do to support economic development in your region?
Yeah, look, so early engagement's important, and we've just spoken about community plans, but it's still really important that companies engage early. The next decade is set to be one of innovation and growth in our region, excitement, opportunity. In the energy sector alone, we've got new solar and wind farms, hydrogen development, a biodiesel production plant, and of course an expanding gas industry as well. So we really talk about early engagement. That is critical. The other one is to get the basics right. We're a mature region. Don't underestimate how mature our region is, how much that the people of the Western Downs understand energy, understand change now, and have an expectation of I guess, what's to be delivered in our region. Probably the third one, and I quite often, I think one of the changes I've seen that, and it sounds quite simple, but it's about becoming part of the communities. I don't like referring to a lot of the bigger developers as outsiders, because some of them have done it really well, and they've become a part of our community. If you sit south of Chinchilla at 6 o'clock or 5 o'clock of the morning and see the cars with energy badges on the side of them come out of that community, with local people driving. Those local people go back to their community of an evening. Some of them go and coach junior rugby league. Some of them are on different other community groups. I think that's really important. So it's important that they become part of the community, just as a lot of our ag groups are. I think that's the third one that I think is critical.
Thanks, Andrew. Once again, your passion and commitment for your community and your region just shine through. You want to see early engagement, want to see companies get the basics right. So it's around understanding people and place and becoming part of the community and continuing the growth and innovation that you spoke of.
Yeah, Wendy, we've got a wonderful opportunity in our region. I may have mentioned it earlier, but regional ag communities for a long time were in decline. This is a fantastic opportunity. We, as a council, want to embrace that. We want to have a look at the big picture stuff and build our communities so that they're good places to live, so that we're not battling, we're not looking for our children to come home, we're not dealing with a lot of the issues that were dealt with 20 years ago. Because we're a strong ag region, we're now a strong energy region. We're the energy capital of Queensland. We're the second most productive ag region in Queensland. There's a lot to be proud of and still a lot of work to do, but I quite often refer to it, we're in a sweet spot.
It's a wonderful example of true coexistence. Thank you so much, Andrew.
Thanks, Wendy.
So I'd like to introduce you to Joanna Stevens. She's the founder of Premier Strategy, and she's a passionate regional engagement expert. So with over 20 years' experience in journalism, government communications, and strategic advisory roles, she has a team of experts who are renowned for navigating complex projects. And there's tons of them, but including projects such as the Victorian Big Battery and the Pioneer Burdekin Pumped Hydro. Jo was born and bred in Ballarat, and she brings deep regional insight and strong community connections. I also love that she began her business when she was on maternity leave, thinking she'd do a bit of engagement and communication and then get a real job once her baby was born. And here she is 23 years later, still doing it. So thank you so much for joining us today, Jo.
Thanks for having me, Wendy. And I will get that real job one day, I'm sure.
So you work right across the country doing engagement. And as I said, you are often on the really complex projects. What are you seeing as the key opportunities for engagement professionals to shift the narrative and position renewables as a regional development opportunity?
Thanks, Wendy. And I think what we first need to do is probably address that we have a problem. And if you read the Dyer report, I think 83% of people interviewed said that they didn't believe that communities would benefit from large-scale renewable energy projects. So we certainly have a problem at that large percentage of people not believing. So one of the things that also came out of the Dyer report, there was two things that I thought were really important. One was there was lots of talk about this lasting legacy, so how we can look at these projects that provide this legacy to regional communities. And the other thing was a participant had commented, which I really liked. He said, when going into consultation, we should not be asking how to get social acceptance right. We should be asking how to get regional development right. So it's about shifting that narrative about looking to those regional development opportunities rather than those social benefits ones. And I think another couple of things that we can do to shift that narrative is maybe to be bold enough to talk about some of those unseen benefits. So some of these proponents are contributing greatly to land taxes, fire levies, payroll taxes, rates, etc. And with governments currently, saying that they're economically tight due to some of the COVID overlay, this is actually keeping our economy going. So it's about understanding what they're contributing through those taxes, and even potentially engaging with government and saying, the communities that we operate in, how can we get a pie of those taxes that these proponents are paying in our region? And the other thing is about sharing our lived experiences. So now that there's becoming more and more transmission and renewable projects out in regional community, there's some wonderful stories out there about how communities are benefiting them. And I feel that there's a reluctance from these people to share these stories because they're scared of the backlash that they may get. But we're hearing them all the time when we're out on the ground, and particularly around draft proofing farms, and they've got, livestock underneath solar farms. There's some really great stories out there. So we have to really encourage those stories to be heard.
I was just speaking with someone this week about the opportunity to develop a handbook of success stories to draw them together, because we all know some and we all know there's good work being done. How do we celebrate and put the spotlight on that? So maybe it's a project for after this. So from your experience, what do you see as the critical factors for working in the regions to ensure that there is true benefits?
I think first it's understanding what true benefits means to people, because it means different things to different communities and it means different things to different people. And I often reflect back. I have a bit of a story. Very early in my marriage, we had 4 little kids at this point, and money was tight. We had a credit card bill, and a family member, I recall, received a $10,000 ring for Christmas, and I was horrified. I was disgusted about this waste of money, and I can remember for days going on to my husband saying, we could have used that money, we could have spent that money. What a waste it was. And that very same Christmas, I actually got a $120 maple tree. And after a couple of days, he pulled me aside and he said to me, Jo, there's a whole lot of people out there in the world that are going, I can't believe they wasted $120 on a maple tree. So it's really relative about how you spend. And I think it's the same thing in communities. For some community members, a $50 netball dress may provide them more benefit than a $50,000 electronic scoreboard. So it's understanding what those true benefits mean in the community.
Have we got some questions here? So there's a question for Andrew. How do you think the proposed legislative changes in Queensland affect the rolling out of community benefits, especially if they're negotiated by council? Do you think it will mean less flexibility and options for the community? And on complaints and disagreements, do you think the current proposals in Queensland go far enough to help speed up complaints resolution?
I think that was for me, was it?
Yes, that was for you, and it is in the chats if you want to look at it. We're starting an easy one, Amanda.
Well, I think it is tricky. I know there's a lot of concern. It's interesting when I was reading through the proposed changes and what the government's looking for comment on, and when you read the paper, they're saying all the right things. They're wanting to address a lot of the concerns that are in place. But reading the finer detail, and I guess talking to some people within companies, but also within government, there are concerns that it's going to slow things down, and that there has actually been a lot of really good research and work done that led to the Queensland Energy and Jobs Plan, and that slowing things down or putting things on pause is really harmful right now to projects that are in play. And it's sending ripples of concern across particularly investors in renewable energy projects that are saying maybe it's just too hard, and that's really dangerous. The other thing that's really worrying people is the extension of the life of coal-fired power stations, that there were actual closure dates put in place, and workers were getting their heads around that, and communities like Billawheeler and around Callide were planning for that. There's been a lot of work going on behind the scenes to actually work out how they're going to manage that, as well as ramp up renewable energy. And these kinds of messages just undermines confidence and trust in everybody in that process, and it's leading to a lot of consternation. So it's like, yes, address these issues, but address them as we're doing it. Don't put everything on hold and start reducing the targets that everyone has finally accepted and gotten on board with. And also that, the talk around having to negotiate community benefits before projects are even approved is, I don't actually understand how that's going to happen. Provide the resources so people can actually understand things and actually get their ducks in order so they're ready to negotiate. But approvals, I don't think, should be contingent on community benefits. How are you going to measure that? And so I'm concerned that some of these things are delay tactics rather than actually, that's not just my concern, that's what I'm hearing from lots of different people. So I think you can set standards, but unless we've got the resources for people to be able to engage properly and feel that they're informed in that, it's going to be it's just creating more problems.
Okay, I just wondered, Blue, are you back on? Is it worth one more try? I did see him join again. Right. Okay. So there's another question here, and I guess there's a question about what's worked well in terms, and this can be for both of you, I think, Amanda and Joanna. I'd love to hear some more about what's worked well in terms of pooling community benefit funds and getting dollars to where they are wanted and needed to make real differences in regional communities. And I think that flows really nicely from your statement that it's what benefit is really relative, Jo. So who wants to have a go at that?
I'm happy to kick off, Amanda, give you a break.
Yeah.
I just following on to what Amanda says, and I think too, some of these government delays, we have to consider this engagement fatigue that's out in the community, and it is just dragging it on. And I totally agree. Some of the complications around community benefits is we're having these discussions before project certainty. So the community is saying, why are we investing time into this when we don't even know whether we've got this project? So they're a little bit reluctant to engage. When we talk about what works well, we worked on a project in New South Wales, which we had some really awesome responses and did it a little bit differently. But we created a series of think tanks where we had our current themes, and then we actually paid members to participate in these think tanks, which was a series of sessions that we held. The idea about paying people to participate in it was that we're getting a really good cross-section of community people. So they had different interests and needs, and you weren't just getting, the really strong advocate for the local football club who's loud and wants this and gets what he wants a lot of the time because he's that type of personality. But it was actually talking to a whole cross-section part of the community, and we got some really rich data out of that. And that worked really well for us. So we did that as an online thing. We ran a series of workshops and videos, and it was really educational for them as well. So it was a real journey.
I love that. And I think when we talk about respectful engagement, one of the issues for everyone to consider is, are you only getting the paid people turning up in your room all the time? Because if we're running things during the day, the only people who can come are the ones who have a job for them to come. So how do you seek those diverse voices? I love that, Joanna. That's a beautiful example. Amanda, you spoke about, Amanda, did you want to answer that as well?
No, I was going to move on to some of the comments. There's lots of stuff coming up in the
yes, there is.
Positive stories, which I think you also asked about.
I really like that somebody made a comment about balancing that with some of the challenges and what we can learn from that, because we don't build trust when we only tell the shiny stories.
Absolutely.
Because people also know that nothing's perfect. And I've seen a really good example of that when we took a group to visit the McIntyre wind farm, and Brent Finlay shows you around his farm. It's an amazing experience for community leaders that we took there. And Brent and Asiona shared the good stuff and what went wrong and what they learned from it, which was really important for those community people to move forward with trusting what they were getting was accurate information, because so often we only talk about the shiny and they know that's not true.
Yeah, it's interesting on that. Like, I'm actually going to be participating in a workshop that the CSIRO are running on Tuesday around trust, from different angles, trust and science. And it's just fascinating because, like, it seems so obvious, but honesty, like actually going, yeah, this is actually hard and it's going to be messy and there are going to be impacts and we can manage this. Like, what is it we need? What's the work that we need to do to manage it? Having, like, it was kind of just, it's been a massive learning for us, because that's just how I was approaching it. And people were like, wow, it's so refreshing for someone just to be honest about it, not to be marketing or trying to sell it as this shiny thing. And I mean, that's easier. We're not a developer. So our job is to actually kind of go, what are the problems and what are the solutions? Like, how do we workshop that? But also remind people that we do have ways to manage it, and what are their ideas, actually creating the spaces for that solutions identification and co-design processes. There's a few different ways I'm seeing that happening, and I love Joanna's example of the think tanks, and setting that up to make sure it is actually people can participate that, and you remove the barriers to it. Another example of that is we're doing some work with Realliance, FRRR, and JSA Associates, with a national regional network of people, mostly in councils who are in renewable energy zones, actually coming together and just doing peer-to-peer learning on a regular basis. And it's been really interesting. The first session, that was kind of everything was doom and gloom, but it very quickly, halfway through the session, turned into just the whole mood shifted, because it's like, yeah, we're figuring this out, and actually sharing that lessons in real time is really powerful. And Realliance are going to be continuing with that network series into the future. They also posted in the chat, Realliance has got a doing Renewables Right resource as well, and have some of those stories. So check that out. On that though, the other part of that is the rights piece. So it's not just approaching this as benefits, it's also rights and responsibility, and how do we create spaces for whose job is it and who is actually responsible to make this work. And we've found a lot of the time, a lot of opposition is coming from, particularly at council level, of just going, they don't actually know what their rights are. And so they feel like their only choice is to oppose projects. Particularly, like one example in Queensland was a council that passed a resolution that they would not support any new wind developments. Now, they couldn't actually stop wind developments. That was a state level decision. But the only way they felt they could get the attention for government to talk to them was to actually just go all out opposition. So there's a question there around advice for companies. And I think actually the challenge here is that, unfortunately, people are not going to necessarily listen to what companies say if it's a company telling them what the rights are, because you have a vested interest. So how do we actually ensure other mechanisms, like websites, whether it's government, whether it's the Australian Energy Infrastructure Commissioner, whether it's independent agencies like ours or consultants like Joanna or Reliance Community Power Agency, that you've got independent people who are resourced to actually be able to, and resourced to educate people and get that out. One model of that was the local energy hubs proposal, so have places in renewable energy zones that people could go to and get advice.
And I agree, Amanda. I think, and something that we always say as a team, we're not the decision maker. So we do not decide whether this project goes ahead or not. But our role here is actually to ensure you're informed and that we can feed that information back into the project. So it's really important for that.
Thank you so much. We've had lots of questions, and I've really enjoyed the panel discussion, even though we have missed out on Andrew's contribution, which would have been very much around the opportunities and challenges that they've already lived through and that they see moving forward. I love that you talked a lot about trust, and that actually is going to be our very next session. We're heading towards the end of the session, but I'd like to quickly get both of you, as a wrap up, what's the one key thing you would like people to walk away from today with? What do you want them to tell people about the opportunities or the challenges around regional development and renewables? Amanda.
One takeaway message. I feel like I've spoken quite a lot. I think have confidence that there's a lot of people who are trying to figure this out. I think getting clear on different roles and responsibilities, and that there are different roles here and we can't all do everything. So I think the thing that's missing, particularly in an environment with decreasing trust, which is on lots of different issues, is how do we create spaces for genuine dialogue that is not just about one issue at a time, but actually enables people to actually understand what the range of things are and how they can get involved, but who's also responsible and how do we hold them to account around that. And unfortunately, that makes it very hard for companies in particular who are not seen as neutral. So where are the resources? And government's also not trusted as well. So what's the infrastructure and ecosystem we need to set up around this to actually support people to manage change?
Thank you so much, Amanda. Jo?
I would say that to be really open, and there's so many pieces of gold that can be found in respectful and genuine conversations. And that works from both a community's perspective and also from a proponent's perspective. And sometimes that anger in some of the community members is actually limiting their ability to get the most out of those economic benefits.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Amanda and Jo, for participating and rolling with it as we've had our little bumps today. I'm so excited to say, if you go to the chat, Rochelle Cooper-Kulkarni actually did a report last year around the challenges and opportunities of a just transition in the Western Downs. So you might be able to read that and get an understanding into some of the insights that Mayor Smith might have been going to share. Before we wrap up, I'd like to throw to one of our fantastic partners, WindLab, for a session wrap-up. And I'd like to welcome Tony Ward, who is WindLab's Director of Land, to the virtual podium to share her insights of what she got from this session, other than the fact that there's very poor reception at Condamine.
Thank you, Wendy. Hello, can you hear me?
Absolutely. We can
Just
see you
checking.
even.
Just making sure I'm not a repeat of Andrew, unfortunately. And Andrew, we will take that offline and continue our discussions about telecommunications.
Yes.
Look, WinLab are thrilled, and thank you, Wendy, for the opportunity of obviously partnering with you today in this session. I just love the diversity of who's actually on the call and seeing where we're all calling in from. You know, you just sort of live in this little bubble. I'm in Brizzy, and you think everyone's just in Brisbane or in like sort of southeast Queensland. But, you know, it is really, really encouraging to know that everything we've heard today is actually being shared nationally. And that's exciting. So it's not really just this tiny little sector that we're dealing with. Look, Amanda, thank you so much. Honestly, the tireless work that you guys do, the Next Economy does, you know, within the communities, it's so considered. And that's what we have to do as an industry, is we need to really look forward and reduce the challenges that you're facing and that you're hearing and that you're getting the feedback on. And just making sure that by reducing those, we're actually genuinely engaging and exploring how we can unlock like short, medium, and long-term practical opportunities within these communities. You know, we don't want to go in and dictate. We want to go in and listen and learn and share. And I think from that, we can then, you know, benefit ourselves and ensure that the community has some benefit. And Jo, that was scary. 83%. Seriously, 83% of regional economies, let me read this, don't believe that there are genuine benefits to for the renewable sector. You know, for someone who has a team that's out, you know, external facing and at the coalface, you know, that's disappointing, because we try to engage genuinely and honestly and on a regular basis too, and also early engagement. I'm such a passionate person for that. If we can take the communities on the journey with us, then it's not only helping to educate them, but let's hopefully, cross fingers, reduce that 83%. I think that's an industry goal, everybody on this call, please. But yeah, sharing our industry success stories, I totally agree. This, I think, will assist to reduce that 83%. And there are some great stories out there, and I'm looking forward to sharing some of them next week out at Hewarden at the QREC, our forum. And Andrew, I'm so sorry, patchy, but we always love meeting with you and chatting with you. You know, your region and the maturity of that region, because it's had to deal with the diversity of you know, incoming industries, and renewable energy is only another one. We've been tarred, obviously, unfortunately, with a bit of a poor legacy brush. So that makes us have to lift our bar, lift our game, and make sure that the lessons learned, for example, someone like myself who's come from 10 years in coal seam gas, let's take those lessons and let's bring those into renewables so that we don't make those same mistakes. Again, you know, everything that we do and listen to today is practical and it is doable. There is nothing that we have heard today that is not doable. So I'm excited. And Wendy, thank you so much on behalf of WinLab. It was, like I said, an absolute pleasure. And for all of those attended today, I hope we took away just maybe one nugget of information that we can then apply to our day-to-day work, and to ensure that these regional communities and the development opportunities that we offer can leave a legacy that we're all proud of. So thank you, Wendy.
Thank you so much, Tony. And thank you, everyone, for joining for our first virtual forum for 2025. We hope, as Tony just said, that you're leaving with something to think about and maybe a few things that you could try. And definitely there's been some great resources shared today. One of the things that I meant to add earlier was there's going to be an agrivoltaics handbook coming out. That's research that's been done, that it isn't released yet, but it'll sort of sit alongside that QFF handbook. So that's really exciting. As I mentioned at Engaged Outcomes, we're on a mission to improve how engagement is done in regional Australia. And besides doing this work, I did mention the podcast, and I think after today there's some episodes you want to listen to. Number 1 episode is Andrew Dyer talking about the Dyer report that Jo referenced. Episode 20 is Amanda Cahill talking about a just transition. Episode 13 has Deputy Mayor Kylie Bourne from the Western Downs Regional Council talking about the amazing work they did in Miles to do a Miles community plan. 10 years ago, they wanted to ensure the benefits were the ones that they wanted rather than having things done to them. And episode 2 is Chris Saunas talking about unlocking shared benefits in the Wimmera. and they all sort of align with today's conversation. So thank you for joining us. Sorry that we've gone a little bit over. It's our first one. We're a bit rusty. The next session is June 19th at 9:30, and the topic is building trust in regional communities, which is obviously we've referenced it today. We're going to tease it out a bit more with the amazing Dr. Kieran Moffat as our guest speaker. So we will be sending you out an email with this link to this recording and some more information. I encourage you to share it widely, and I look forward to seeing you all again in June. So have a wonderful morning, everyone.